At 36 years old, Kareem earned exactly $59,420 a year as a senior mechanic at a Tonawanda machine shop. It was a good, honest living that paid the mortgage on their modest $250,000 North Park bungalow and kept his 2012 Toyota Camry, with its 187,000 miles, running like a top. He was a man who understood the value of solid things, tuned engines, balanced wheels, and what he believed was a stable, loving marriage. That belief, the very foundation of his world, was about to be systematically dismantled in the harsh, fluorescent light of his own kitchen. It was the silence that woke him. Not a sound, but the absence of one. For 9 years he had fallen asleep to the soft rhythm of his wife Sharonda's breathing beside him. But at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, the space next to him in their $3,200 queen-sized bed was cold. He reached out a hand, his calloused fingers brushing against an empty sheet. He sat up, his heart giving a low, anxious thump. Her car wasn't in the driveway. He'd seen that when he'd gotten up for a glass of water an hour earlier. She'd said she was having a girls' night with her friend Lisa from work, a rare late one. Kareem, ever trusting, had simply kissed her goodbye that evening, telling her to have fun and be safe. He'd laid out one of his own $25 oversized sweatshirts for her in case she got cold, a small act of service that was his love language. He padded out of the bedroom, his bare feet silent on the worn hardwood floors. They'd refinished themselves one sweltering July. The house was still, each object in its place. The framed photo of their wedding day on the mantel, his worn $89 Timex watch on the nightstand, the stack of automotive magazines on the coffee table. Everything looked normal, but a cold dread was starting to seep into the edges of the quiet. He checked his phone. No texts, no missed calls. He sent a simple message, "Hey, you okay? Getting late." The single gray checkmark under the message told him it hadn't even been delivered. Her phone was probably dead. That had to be it. But as the minutes ticked by, stretching from 2:50 to 3 a.m., the simple explanation began to feel thin and inadequate, a flimsy cover for a truth he wasn't ready to face. He had no idea how profoundly his life was about to change, how the next few minutes would detonate everything he held sacred. He was just a man waiting for his wife, unaware that the woman he was waiting for no longer existed in the way he understood. Have you ever had that feeling, that deep in your gut certainty that something is wrong before you have any proof? It's a cold, sinking feeling that defies logic. Let us know in the comments if you've ever trusted your intuition, even when everyone else told you that you were just being paranoid. At 3:04 a.m., his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, not with a reply from Sharonda, but with a notification from their home security system. A simple, black and white banner, motion detected at kitchen door. A second later, he heard the faint click of the lock and the whisper of the door opening. Relief washed over him, so potent it made him dizzy. She was home. She was safe. He took a deep breath, ready to greet her with a gentle chiding about her dead phone, ready to wrap her in his arms and guide her to bed. But the woman who stumbled through the door was a stranger. To understand the depth of the wound, you have to understand the life that was torn apart. Kareem's life was built on a foundation of quiet consistency and deep, unassuming love. His world was the smell of grease and metal at the Tonawanda shop, the satisfying click of a socket wrench, and the hum of a perfectly tuned engine. He wasn't a man of grand gestures or poetic words. His love was in the packed lunches he made for Sharonda every morning, the way he always warmed up her 2018 Honda CR-V in the winter, and the sturdy, hand-built shelves he'd installed in their pantry. Their home in North Park was a testament to his handiwork. It was a simple, 1,400-square-foot bungalow they'd bought for $190,000 7 years prior. its value slowly climbing with the neighborhood. It wasn't the sprawling mansion in Williamsville his brother Terrell always talked about, but it was theirs. Sharonda had, for most of their 9-year marriage, seemed to appreciate this life. She worked as an administrative assistant at a downtown law firm, earning a respectable $48,000 a year. She filled their home with decorative pillows from Home Goods, each one costing no more than $20, and scented candles that smelled of vanilla and sandalwood. She curated an image of domestic bliss. On weekends, they'd work in their small garden, a patch of earth behind the house where Kareem grew tomatoes and peppers with a quiet pride. Their life was a tapestry of small, pleasant details, watching movies on their 5-year-old $600 Vizio television, sharing a $30 bottle of wine on a Friday night, the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. Or so Kareem thought. The centerpiece of their family life was the Sunday dinner. Every week, without fail, they would drive to his mother's house in the Elmwood Village. It was a tradition their father, a proud, hard-working man who had built a successful construction business from nothing, had started decades ago. Since his passing 2 years prior, their mother, a warm and loving woman named Evelyn, had insisted on keeping it going. The dinners were a loud, joyful affair. His Auntie Carol would bring her famous 7-cheese macaroni, a dish that probably cost $50 in dairy alone. His cousins would argue about the Buffalo Bills, and at the head of the table, where his father once sat, his older brother Terrell would hold court. Terrell was everything Kareem was not. He was handsome, charismatic, and dripping with an effortless confidence that always made Kareem feel a step behind. Terrell didn't work with his hands. He was a consultant, a vague title that seemed to involve expensive lunches and a constantly ringing iPhone 14 Pro Max. He lived in a sleek, $3,500 a month loft in Allentown, drove a leased white BMW 4 Series that cost him $950 a month, and wore $1,500 Canali suits as if they were pajamas. Next to Terrell's polished $400 Allen Edmonds shoes, Kareem's steel-toed work boots always felt clumsy and out of place. "Still getting your hands dirty, little brother?" Terrell would say with a wink, clapping Kareem on the back. It was framed as a joke, but the condescension was always there, a bitter aftertaste to his expensive cologne. "Someone's got to keep the world running, right?" Sharonda would laugh, a high tinkling sound. "Don't you start, Terrell. Kareem loves that old shop." But Kareem noticed how her eyes would follow his brother, how she seemed to hang on his every word about a new art gallery opening or a trip to Toronto he was planning. He'd chalked it up to Terrell's magnetic personality. Everyone was drawn to Terrell. What he didn't know was that Sharonda's admiration was something far more insidious. He saw her glance at Terrell's $12,000 Rolex, and then at his own functional, unpretentious Timex, and for a fleeting moment, he would feel a pang of inadequacy. He'd push it down, reminding himself that he and Sharonda had built a real life, a life of substance, not of flashy surfaces. He had no idea that Sharonda had been comparing them for years, and in her eyes he had always come up short. The woman who stumbled into the kitchen at 3:04 a.m. was not the Sharonda who curated their life with $20 pillows. This Sharonda's movements were clumsy, her usually impeccable silk press was disheveled, and she carried the stale scent of bar smoke and expensive perfume, a scent he didn't recognize. She was wearing a tight black dress he'd never seen before, a stark contrast to the comfortable clothes she usually chose. It looked expensive, like something that belonged in Terrell's world, not theirs. She fumbled with her purse, a $600 Kate Spade bag he knew she couldn't afford on her own, letting it drop to the floor with a heavy thud. Kareem remained frozen in the hallway, shrouded in shadow, watching the scene unfold on the small screen of his phone. The Ring camera in the kitchen, installed for security after a neighbor's break-in, was now a silent witness to the demolition of his marriage. The camera's fisheye lens distorted the familiar room, making it look alien and menacing. The audio, usually just capturing the hum of the refrigerator, was now crystal clear, picking up every sound with horrifying fidelity. Sharonda leaned heavily against the $1,800 granite countertop, her head in her hands. She was muttering to herself, her words thick and slurred. "So stupid," she whispered, her voice a ragged sigh. So stupid." She pushed herself upright and staggered to the refrigerator, pulling the door open. The bright interior light illuminated her face, and Kareem could see the slight smear of her lipstick, the unfocused glaze in her deep brown eyes. She grabbed a bottle of water, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She twisted the cap, failed, and tried again. Finally succeeding with a frustrated grunt, she drank deeply, then leaned against the counter again, her back to the camera. For a moment, there was only the sound of her heavy breathing. Kareem's own breath was caught in his chest. "Just tell me you're drunk," he thought. "Tell me you had too many $5 glasses of wine with Lisa, and you're sorry." He was ready to forgive anything, as long as it was simple. But then she spoke again, her voice low and laced with a strange, melancholic bitterness that chilled him to the bone. She wasn't talking to him. She was talking to the empty room, to herself, to the ghost of the choices she had made. 9 years, she slurred, her voice cracking. 9 years with the wrong brother. Kareem's blood turned to ice. He felt the air leave his lungs in a silent rush. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis. The wrong brother. The words echoed in the small, dark hallway where he stood, and in the cavernous, empty space that had just opened up inside his chest. He felt a wave of nausea. He gripped the doorframe to steady himself, his knuckles white. He kept watching the phone screen, mesmerized by the horror. Sharonda took another long drink of water, then laughed, a hollow, joyless sound that was uglier than a sob. "Always," she whispered, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, drunken murmur. "It was always him. I've always loved your brother." She didn't say Terrell's name. She didn't have to. The words hung in the air, captured in perfect, damning clarity by the $15 a month cloud storage plan he'd almost canceled last week. "I've always loved your brother." Kareem slowly lowered the phone. He didn't make a sound. He didn't run into the kitchen and scream. He didn't shatter the quiet peace of his home. A strange, glacial calm settled over him, freezing the rage and the pain into a solid, heavy block in his chest. He was no longer a husband waiting for his wife. He was a mechanic, a man who diagnosed problems. And he was looking at a catastrophic system failure. The engine of his life had seized, and the cause was not a mystery. It was betrayal. A betrayal so deep and so close to home, it was almost unthinkable. He watched as Sharonda, oblivious, finally pushed herself away from the counter and stumbled toward their bedroom. He quickly and silently slipped into the spare room, closing the door with a barely audible click. He heard her fall into their bed, the bed they had shared for 3,285 nights. And within minutes, a soft snore filled the space where her confession had been. He sat on the edge of the spare bed, the one with the lumpy mattress they kept for guests, and stared into the darkness. The image from the Ring camera was burned into his mind, his wife, in his kitchen, pledging her love to his brother. He opened his phone again, went to the Ring app, and with a steady hand that betrayed none of the seismic shockwaves tearing through him, he downloaded the video file. He saved it to his phone, to his cloud drive, and then emailed it to a private account he created just for this purpose. The file was labeled simply, Evidence, October 17th, 3:04 a.m., the time of death for his marriage. The next morning, the sun rose with a kind of cruel cheerfulness, spilling light across the floor of the spare room where Kareem had sat all night, fully dressed without sleeping a single minute. He heard Sharonda stir around 7 a.m., the familiar sounds of her morning routine. The shower, the hairdryer, the clink of her coffee mug, now sounding like a broadcast from a foreign country. Every normal sound was an indictment, a layer of the lie he had been living. He had spent the night in a state of hyper-awareness, his mind replaying not just the video, but the last 7 years of his life, the moral turpitude clause. The words from his father's will reading, held 2 years ago in a stuffy lawyer's office, came back to him with stunning clarity. His father, a man who valued loyalty above all else, had structured his will to protect his family from itself. He had seen the potential for greed and betrayal, and had installed a firewall. Should any beneficiary be proven, with irrefutable evidence, to have committed an act of profound moral betrayal against a direct family member, specifically a sibling, their portion of the inheritance shall be forfeit and redistributed among the remaining beneficiaries. At the time, Kareem had thought it was overly dramatic, a relic of his father's old-school mentality. Now it was a weapon, a very precise, very powerful weapon. The estate, valued at roughly $2.5 million, was held in a trust managed by the family's longtime attorney. Terrell, as the elder son and his father's favorite, was the primary beneficiary, set to inherit the controlling interest in the construction company and the lion's share of the liquid assets. Kareem was to receive a smaller, but still life-changing sum. But that was all about to change. He heard Sharonda's footsteps approaching the spare room door. He forced his body to relax, to erase the rigid tension from his shoulders. He composed his face into a mask of sleepy curiosity. This was his new reality, a performance. He was playing the part of the loving, unsuspecting husband. It was the hardest role of his life. The door creaked open. Sharonda stood there, wrapped in her favorite $70 chenille robe, a look of mild concern on her face. Her deep brown skin was luminous, and her hair was neatly wrapped in a silk scarf. She looked beautiful, and the sight of her sent a fresh wave of pain through him. "Baby, why did you sleep in here?" she asked, her voice soft and still a little raspy. "Is your back hurting again?" He looked up at her, forcing a tired smile. It felt like stretching a wound. "Yeah, just got a little stiff in the night. Didn't want to wake you tossing and turning." The lie came out smoothly, easily. It terrified him. She came over and sat on the bed beside him, placing a cool hand on his forehead. "You don't feel warm. You looked so tired when I got in. Did you even hear me come home?" The casual cruelty of the question was breathtaking. He had to physically restrain himself from flinching. "Nah, I was dead to the world," he said, his voice a perfect imitation of his normal morning grogginess. "Must have been some girls' night. What time did you even get in?" This was the first test. He watched her face, looking for the flicker of a lie. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Oh, I don't know, maybe 1-ish? Lisa and I just got to talking and lost track of time. You know how it is." 1-ish, not 3:04 a.m. The lie was so clean, so effortless. He nodded slowly, as if accepting it without question. "Well, I'm glad you had fun," he said, his voice even. "You deserve it." He stood up, stretching his arms over his head. "I gotta get in the shower. I've got that big Cummins diesel engine to rebuild today." He walked past her, close enough to smell the faint, lingering trace of the strange perfume under the scent of her lavender body wash. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. In the bathroom, he turned on the shower, the rush of hot water covering the sound of his own ragged breathing. He leaned against the cool tile, his eyes closed. The mask of the calm husband momentarily dropped. He felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. The rage would come later. For now, there was only the grim, methodical work of gathering the pieces. He had the video. Now he needed to understand the scope of the deception. 7 years, she'd said. 7 years of fake smiles, of shared holidays, of lies spoken in the bed they shared. He had to play dumb. He had to let them think he was still the same trusting, simple Kareem. Their underestimation of him, he realized with a chilling certainty, would be their downfall. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception, a slow, torturous dance of feigned normalcy. Kareem moved through his life like a ghost, performing the mundane rituals of his marriage, while his mind operated on a separate, strategic track. Every conversation was a minefield, every touch a betrayal. On Wednesday evening, 2 days after the confession, Sharonda came home from work, complaining about her boss. "He's just so demanding, Kareem. He wants these briefs organized by tomorrow, and I'm buried." She sighed, dropping her $150 work tote on the kitchen island. "I swear, sometimes I wish I had a rich husband, so I could just relax." She laughed, as if it were a joke. Kareem was at the stove, stirring a pot of chili, the recipe his mother had taught him. The aroma, which usually filled him with comfort, now smelled like ashes. He didn't turn around. "Yeah, that would be the life," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Maybe you should have married Terrell." The silence that followed was deafening. He could feel her go still behind him. He counted 3 full seconds before she forced another light laugh. "Oh, please. Can you imagine? I'd go crazy. Your brother is way too high maintenance for me." He finally turned, a spoon dripping with chili sauce in his hand, and gave her a small, unreadable smile. "You think so?" "I know so," she said, a little too quickly. She walked over and wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, resting her head on his back. Her touch felt like a brand. "I married the right brother. The one who makes me chili and fixes my car." He wanted to rip himself away from her. He wanted to scream the words from the video back in her face. Instead, he just stood there, a statue in his own kitchen, and let her hold him. "Chili's almost ready," was all he said. It was a victory of restraint, a small, brutal piece of his larger strategy. That night he lay in their bed, feigning sleep while she scrolled through her phone, the screen's blue light illuminating her face. He watched her through slitted eyes, saw her smile at a message, and felt a cold certainty that she was texting his brother. The lies weren't just from Sharonda. The next day, Kareem called Terrell. He needed to hear his voice, to see if he could detect the lie there too. He used the excuse of a question about their mother's upcoming birthday. "Hey, big bro," Kareem started, keeping his tone light and casual. "Kareem? What's up, man?" Terrell's voice boomed through the phone, full of false bonhomie. "To what do I owe the honor? Need me to co-sign on a loan for a new screwdriver?" He chuckled at his own joke. It was a familiar jab, one of 1,000 small condescensions Kareem had endured over the years. Usually, he'd just laugh it off. This time, the words landed like stones. "Funny," Kareem said, his voice flat. "No, I was just calling about Mom's birthday gift. Wondering if you wanted to go in on something together." "Ah, right. Good thinking," Terrell said. "Listen, I'm a little swamped right now. Just got out of a meeting about a new development project downtown. Big money. You know how it is?" There was a pause, and Kareem could hear the faint sound of a woman's laugh in the background. It wasn't Sharonda's, but the sound still made his stomach clench. "Tell you what," Terrell continued, his voice slick. "I'll just give you my card. Get her something nice, something shiny. You know what she likes, just keep it under $1,000, okay? The trust is a little tight this month." Another lie. Kareem knew for a fact from the last quarterly statement the estate lawyer had sent that the trust was anything but tight. Terrell was just reinforcing his role as the generous benefactor, the one who handled the money. "Sure thing, Terrell, thanks," Kareem said. Then he delivered his own calculated line. "By the way, Sharonda said she had a wild girls' night the other night. Said she and Lisa really tied one on." There was another pause, this one charged with something Kareem couldn't quite decipher. It was the sound of a mind quickly calculating. "Oh yeah?" Terrell said, his voice a little too casual. "That's nice. She deserves to have fun. You work her too hard, little brother." "I guess so," Kareem replied. "Anyway, I'll let you go. Talk soon." He hung up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. He had done it. He had spoken to both of them, looked them in the eye, and played his part. They had no idea. They saw him as simple, predictable Kareem, the grease monkey who was too naive to ever suspect a thing. They were moving through their lives with the careless arrogance of people who believed they had gotten away with it. And every single day that he played dumb, every normal conversation, every shared meal, he was gathering not evidence, but resolve. He was letting them build their own gallows, and he was calmly, quietly, waiting for the right moment to pull the lever. With the confession secured and his role as the oblivious husband established, Kareem's mind began to work like the diagnostic computers at his shop, sifting through years of data, searching for the fault codes he had missed. The holiday aunt visits. That was the key. For the last 7 years, Sharonda had made a tradition of visiting her Aunt Shirley in Rochester for a long weekend, 3 or 4 times a year. Aunt Shirley was supposedly her mother's older sister, a lonely widow who needed the company. Sharonda would pack a small suitcase, her $250 Samsonite carry-on, and Kareem would drive her to the bus station. He'd kiss her goodbye, telling her to give Shirley his love. She would return 3 days later, full of stories about playing cards and watching old movies with her aunt. Now, the memory of those visits curdled in his stomach. He remembered one time, about 4 years ago. Sharonda had come back from a visit with a new purse, a designer Michael Kors tote that would have cost at least $400. When he'd asked about it, she'd waved it off. "Oh, this?" Aunt Shirley insisted. "She has way too much money and no one to spend it on." Kareem had never met Aunt Shirley. In the early years, he'd suggested they drive to Rochester together to visit her. "Oh no, baby," Sharonda had said quickly. "She's very old-fashioned. She gets flustered with too many people around. It's better if it's just me." He had accepted it. Why wouldn't he? His mind flashed to other details, other red flags he had dismissed. The timing of the visits often coincided with business trips Terrell claimed to be taking. "Going to a conference in Syracuse," Terrell would announce at Sunday dinner. A few days later, Sharonda would mention her upcoming trip to see Aunt Shirley in Rochester, just an hour's drive from Syracuse. It was so obvious in hindsight, it made him physically ill. They were hiding in plain sight, using the geography of upstate New York as their cover. He remembered a Christmas from 2 years ago, just before his father passed. The whole family was gathered. Sharonda was wearing a new necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small, elegant diamond. It was far more expensive than anything he could have afforded. A piece that easily cost over $2,000. "It's beautiful," his mother, Evelyn, had said, admiring it. "Kareem, you have wonderful taste." Before Kareem could respond, feeling a hot flush of confusion, Sharonda had jumped in. "Oh, this was from Aunt Shirley, an early Christmas present. She sent it over." He remembered looking over at Terrell, who was leaning against the fireplace, swirling a glass of expensive $150 a bottle scotch. Terrell had caught his eye and given him a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a small smirk playing on his lips. At the time, Kareem had interpreted it as a sign of shared amusement at Sharonda's generous aunt. Now he saw it for what it was, a moment of shared, secret triumph. Terrell had bought her the necklace, and he was flaunting it right in Kareem's face. The arrogance was staggering. The outrage began to accumulate in his chest, a slow burning fire. It wasn't just the affair, it was the condescension. It was the years of being treated like a fool, the butt of a long-running private joke between his wife and his brother. He thought of all the times Terrell had helped them out, slipping Kareem a few $100s and saying, "Here, take Sharonda out to a nice dinner. She deserves it." He had thought it was brotherly generosity. Now he knew it was guilt money, or worse, a power play. Terrell wasn't just sleeping with his wife, he was subsidizing their marriage, turning Kareem into a kept man without his knowledge. He thought of Sharonda's constant complaints about money, her sighs over their budget. "If only we had a little more, Kareem. We could travel. We could have nice things." She had been living a double life, enjoying the stability he provided while sampling the luxury Terrell offered. She wanted both. She wanted his steadfast love and his brother's deep pockets. One memory in particular stood out with agonizing clarity. It was their anniversary last year. He had saved up for months, hiding cash from his paychecks, to buy her a pair of diamond earrings. They weren't large, just simple, elegant studs from a local jeweler, but they had cost him $800, a significant expense. He had presented them to her over a dinner he'd cooked himself. She had smiled and thanked him, but he'd seen a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. "They're lovely, baby," she'd said, her voice lacking genuine warmth. Later that week, she'd claimed one of the earrings had fallen out and gotten lost down the sink drain. He had spent 2 hours taking the P-trap apart, his hands covered in grime, searching for it. He never found it. He now suspected she had simply thrown it away, a paltry gift from the wrong brother. Each memory was a fresh cut. The 7-year affair wasn't just a physical betrayal, it was a psychological dismantling of his reality. They hadn't just cheated. They had mocked him. They had laughed at his simple, honest life while indulging in their own sordid drama. The still, cold place in his chest was beginning to heat up. It was no longer just about pain. It was about justice. His father had been a man of honor. He had built his legacy on it. And Kareem, his quiet, underestimated son, was about to become the instrument of that honor. The Sunday dinner was in 3 days. On Friday afternoon, Kareem left the shop an hour early. He told his boss his stomach was bothering him, an excuse that was not far from the truth. Instead of driving home to North Park, he took the I-190 north toward downtown Buffalo, his knuckles white on the steering wheel of his old Camry. He had an appointment. The law offices of Albright, Hayes, and Finch were on the 25th floor of a glass tower that overlooked the lake. The lobby was a symphony of quiet wealth, polished marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than his car, and a receptionist who spoke in hushed, respectful tones. It was Terrell's world, not his. Kareem, in his grease-stained work pants and a plain $15 black t-shirt, felt profoundly out of place. But he walked with a straight back, his expression unreadable. He was shown into a corner office with a panoramic view of the city. Mrs. Albright, the estate lawyer, was a formidable black woman in her late 60s. She had been his father's most trusted advisor for over 30 years. She wore a perfectly tailored St. John's suit that likely cost $3,000 and had a gaze that could cut through steel. Her graying hair was styled in elegant, tight coils. She had known Kareem since he was a boy. "Kareem," she said, her voice warm but businesslike as she stood to shake his hand. Her handshake was firm. "It's good to see you, though your email sounded urgent. Please, sit." Kareem sat in one of the two plush leather chairs that faced her massive mahogany desk. The desk was immaculate, holding only a sleek laptop, a leather-bound blotter, and a single, framed photo of her with his father. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Mrs. Albright," he began, his voice steady. "Your father was my friend for a very long time, Kareem." "My door is always open to his sons," she said, her eyes studying him. "What's this about?" "Your email mentioned irrefutable evidence regarding the moral turpitude clause." Kareem took a deep breath. This was it. He reached into the inner pocket of his worn Carhartt jacket and pulled out his phone. He didn't say a word. He simply opened the video file, turned the phone around, and placed it on the polished surface of her desk. Mrs. Albright leaned forward, her expression shifting from curiosity to intense focus. The tinny audio from the phone's speaker filled the opulent, silent office. Sharonda's slurred voice was horrifyingly clear. 9 years. 9 years with the wrong brother. It was always him. I've always loved your brother. Kareem watched the lawyer's face. He saw her jaw tighten, her eyes narrow. She listened to the entire 58-second clip without blinking. When it was over, a profound silence settled in the room, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic. She slowly sat back in her $4,000 Herman Miller chair and looked at Kareem, her expression a mixture of shock and deep, profound sorrow. "My God, Kareem," she whispered. She looked at him not as a lawyer, looking at a client, but as a woman who had watched him grow up. "I am so sorry." Kareem just nodded, his face a stony mask. "The clause in my father's will," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Is this irrefutable?" Mrs. Albright's professional demeanor snapped back into place. Her eyes were hard now. "The confession is explicit. It's time-stamped. It was recorded on your property. It names the relationship and, by direct inference, the other party involved. Your brother." She let out a long, slow breath. "Your father was a very specific man. He foresaw the possibility of this kind of poison entering his family." "Yes, Kareem. In the context of the will, this is as irrefutable as it gets." "What happens now?" he asked. She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. "We have two paths. The quiet path is to present this evidence to Terrell privately. He would be given the option to voluntarily renounce his inheritance to avoid public exposure. The second path is more direct." She paused, her eyes locking with his. "It involves presenting this evidence in a forum where the betrayal cannot be denied. Your father's will gives me, as the executor, the authority to act on such evidence to protect the integrity of the estate." Her billing rate was a staggering $1,200 an hour, and in that moment, Kareem knew she was worth every single penny. "Sunday dinner," Kareem said, the words tasting like metal. "It's at my mother's house. Everyone will be there. My mother, my aunts, Terrell, and Sharonda." Mrs. Albright studied him for a long moment. She saw not the grieving husband, but the determined son. She saw his father's steel in his eyes. "That would be a public forum of a sort," she said carefully. "It would be final. The moment that video is played, the clause is triggered. I would have no choice but to immediately file a motion to freeze the trust and begin the legal process of disinheritance. Terrell's access to all funds would be cut off, effective immediately." "That's the path I want to take," Kareem said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "They built this lie in the heart of my family. I'm going to dismantle it in the same place." Mrs. Albright nodded slowly, a look of grim respect on her face. "Your father would be proud of your resolve, Kareem. He always said you were the strong one, the one with the solid foundation." she opened a drawer in her desk. "I will draft the preliminary notices. They will be ready to file Monday morning. But the trigger, that will be you at that dinner table. Are you prepared for the fallout?" "I'm prepared," Kareem said. He stood up, his business concluded. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was the executor of his father's final wish, to protect the family's honor, no matter the cost. As he rode the silent elevator down 25 floors, he felt a profound sense of clarity. The pain was still there, a hot coal in his chest, but it was now overlaid with a cold, hard sense of purpose. He was going to take back his life. What would you do if you had proof of such a deep betrayal? Would you confront them quietly, or would you expose the truth for everyone to see? Share your thoughts below. We all face moments where we have to choose between a quiet peace and a loud, painful truth. The air at Sunday dinner was thick with the familiar, comforting smells of roasted chicken and his Auntie Carol's legendary mac and cheese. Laughter and conversation flowed around the long dining table in his mother's cozy home. The same table where Kareem had celebrated every birthday and holiday of his life. Everything on the surface was exactly as it had always been. But for Kareem, the scene was a nauseating parody. He sat in his usual spot, a polite smile fixed on his face, a glass of iced tea untouched before him. Across the table, Sharonda was laughing at something Terrell had said, her hand resting casually on his arm. She was wearing a new dress, a flowing, floral print piece that must have cost at least $300. Another gift, no doubt. Terrell, at the head of the table, was in his element. He was wearing a crisp, white $250 Ralph Lauren polo shirt and telling an exaggerated story about closing a deal. His deep brown skin glowed with confidence under the warm light of the dining room chandelier. "And the guy looks at me," Terrell boomed, "and says, 'You're a miracle worker, Terrell.' I told him, 'I'm not a miracle worker. I just know how to make things happen.'" Everyone laughed, including Kareem's mother, Evelyn, who looked at her older son with undisguised pride. "That's my boy," she said, beaming. "Always reaching for the stars." Kareem watched the performance, the easy intimacy between his wife and his brother, the way their eyes met over the table, sharing a secret spark of amusement. He saw his mother's innocent pride, his aunt's blissful ignorance. The whole scene was a lie, and he was the only one who knew the truth. The weight of it was immense. He had arrived early, under the pretense of helping his mother set up. While she was in the kitchen, he had quietly connected his phone to the living room's large, 65-inch Samsung Smart TV via Bluetooth. The device was paired, ready. The remote control was in his pocket. It felt as heavy as a stone. Dinner wound down. The plates were cleared, and dessert was served, a sweet potato pie that Kareem normally loved but couldn't bring himself to eat. The conversation lulled. This was the moment. His heart began to pound, a heavy, frantic drum against his ribs. He took a slow, steadying breath, the mechanic in him taking over, running a final systems check before engaging a powerful machine. He stood up. The small motion was enough to draw the room's attention. "If everyone's finished," he began, his voice shockingly calm and clear, "there's something I'd like to share, something I think the whole family needs to see." A murmur of curiosity went through the room. His mother smiled. "What is it, sweetie? Did you finally buy a new car?" Terrell chuckled. "Let me guess, little brother, you made a video of you finally beating a video game?" Sharonda smiled uneasily, her eyes darting between Kareem and Terrell. "Kareem, what is this?" Kareem didn't answer them. He looked directly at his mother. "Mom, what Dad valued most was loyalty, honor. He built his life on it. He built this family on it." He then let his gaze drift to Terrell, then to Sharonda, and he put measures in place to protect it, even after he was gone. He pulled the TV remote from his pocket. He pointed it at the dark screen in the adjoining living room, which was visible from the dining table. With a click, the screen flickered to life. It showed his phone's home screen. He navigated to his photo gallery with his thumb, his movements deliberate and precise. Terrell leaned back in his chair, a look of bored amusement on his face. "What is this, Kareem? A slideshow of your greatest hits at the garage?" Kareem didn't reply. He selected the file. Evidence, October 17th, 3:04 a.m. He pressed play. The familiar fish-eye view of his own kitchen filled the massive screen. The sound of Sharonda's stumbling entrance echoed through the silent house. The entire family turned to watch, their expressions confused. Sharonda's face went white. She stared at the screen, her fork clattering onto her plate. "Kareem, what are you doing?" she hissed, her voice a panicked whisper. "Turn it off." But it was too late. The scene played out in excruciating high-definition detail, her drunken muttering, her head in her hands, and then the words, amplified by the TV's soundbar, filling the shocked silence of the room. 9 years? 9 years with the wrong brother? A collective gasp went through the room. Auntie Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Kareem's mother, Evelyn, stared at the screen, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. And then, the final devastating line. "It was always him. I've always loved your brother." The video ended. The screen went black. But the words remained, hanging in the air like poison. The silence that followed was the most profound Kareem had ever experienced. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air, all the joy, all the history out of the room. Every eye was now on Sharonda and Terrell. Sharonda was ashen, her body rigid with shock. She looked like she had been turned to stone. Terrell's reaction was different. The smug, confident mask had shattered, replaced by a look of pure, panicked fury. His face, usually a smooth, handsome brown, was now mottled with red. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "What is this?" he roared, his voice shaking with rage. He wasn't looking at Kareem. He was looking at Sharonda. "What did you do?" I was drunk, Terrell," she stammered, tears starting to stream down her face. "I didn't mean it. It was just words." But no one was listening to her. All eyes were on the two of them. The ugly truth of their 7-year lie exposed in the heart of the family they had betrayed. Kareem remained standing, his expression calm, his hand still holding the remote. He looked at his mother. Her face was a landscape of pain. Tears were silently tracing paths down her cheeks. She looked from Terrell to Sharonda, and then finally, to her younger son. In her eyes, he saw not just heartbreak, but a dawning, terrible understanding. "The moral turpitude clause," Kareem said, his voice quiet, but carrying across the devastated room. "Dad knew. He always knew people's hearts." Terrell's head snapped toward Kareem, his eyes blazing with a desperate, cornered animal rage. You did this! You think you can—" "It's done, Terrell," Kareem said, his voice cutting through his brother's tirade with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "It's all done." He dropped the remote onto the table. The small plastic clatter sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence. The Sunday dinner was over. The family, as he knew it, was over. And a new, terrible chapter had just begun. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Terrell, his face contorted with rage, lunged across the table, not at Kareem, but toward the living room, as if he could somehow physically destroy the evidence that had just condemned him. "You set me up!" he screamed, his voice cracking. Auntie Carol and his uncle grabbed him, holding him back as he struggled. his $1,500 suit now rumpled and pathetic. Sharonda simply sat there, sobbing hysterically, her carefully constructed world collapsing in on her in real time. "Kareem, please," she wept, her words barely coherent. "I love you. It was a mistake, a stupid, drunken mistake." But her pleas were lost in the storm of her own making. The most devastating reaction came from his mother. Evelyn slowly rose from her chair, her movements stiff and aged. She walked over to Terrell, her face etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to physically pain her. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She simply looked at her firstborn son, the pride of her life, and spoke in a voice that was barely a whisper. Yet it silenced the entire room. "Your father is weeping in heaven," she said. Then she turned and walked slowly out of the room, her back stooped under the weight of the betrayal. The quiet finality of her words was more damning than any shout could have been. Kareem didn't stay to watch the rest. He walked out of the house, got into his 2012 Camry, and drove away, leaving the wreckage behind him. He didn't go home. He couldn't. He drove to a cheap $89 a night motel on the outskirts of Buffalo and checked in. The first message came at 8:14 p.m., just as he was sitting on the edge of the stiff polyester bedspread. It was from Sharonda. Voicemail 1, Sharonda, 8:14 p.m. "Kareem, baby, where are you? Please pick up the phone. We need to talk about this. This is a huge misunderstanding. Your mother is a wreck. You can't just do this to us, to the family. Call me." Her voice was shaky, but still trying to maintain control. He didn't answer. He just listened, his face impassive. Voicemail 2, Terrell, 8:22 p.m. "You little snake. You think you're so smart, don't you? You recorded her? That's illegal. I'm going to sue you for everything you have. You just destroyed this family, all for what? A little bit of money? You were always jealous of me. Always." The voice was pure venom, dripping with entitled rage. Kareem deleted it without a second thought. The legal advice from Mrs. Albright had been clear. A recording made in one's own home, in a state with one-party consent laws like New York, was perfectly admissible for a civil matter like this. Terrell's threats were empty. The consequences began to cascade the very next morning. At 9:01 a.m., Mrs. Albright filed the emergency motion with the probate court. By 11:30 a.m., a judge had signed the order. The family trust, the source of Terrell's entire lavish lifestyle, was frozen. Voicemail 3, Terrell, 11:45 a.m. "My cards were just declined. My bank account is frozen. What did you do? Kareem, I'm warning you. You need to call that witch of a lawyer and undo this right now. This is my money. Dad wanted me to have it." The rage was gone, replaced by a high-pitched, frantic panic. The calls kept coming, a desperate barrage against his wall of silence. Voicemail 4, Sharonda, 1:10 p.m. Sound of sobbing. "Kareem, they're going to evict me. The lease is in your name. The landlord called. He said you gave notice. Where am I supposed to go? I have nothing. Please, Kareem. I made a terrible mistake. 7 years. It wasn't love. It was... I don't know what it was. It was a fantasy. You are my real life. Please don't take my real life away from me." Her pleading was raw, pathetic. He had indeed called the landlord and given 30-day notice, and had the locks changed on the North Park house that morning for a cost of $225. The downfall was swift and brutal, a direct consequence of their own actions. Terrell's leased white BMW 4 Series, with its $950 monthly payment, was repossessed from the parking garage of his Allentown loft 2 weeks later. Without the trust fund to pay the $3,500 monthly rent, he was evicted, forced to move his expensive furniture into a $150 a month storage unit and crash on a friend's couch. His consulting business, which was nothing more than a fiction propped up by his father's reputation and money, evaporated overnight. Sharonda's fate was just as grim. Fired from her job at the law firm for the reputational damage caused by the scandal, a clause in her employment contract she had likely never read, she was left with her $48,000 a year salary gone and no place to live. She had to move back in with her parents in a cramped apartment on the east side, the designer clothes and handbags a bitter reminder of the life she had thrown away. The $600 Kate Spade purse and the $2,000 diamond necklace were sold for a fraction of their value to a pawn shop, just to cover her immediate expenses. The legal process of the disinheritance took 6 months. Terrell hired a lawyer, a flashy downtown attorney who cost him a $10,000 retainer he had to borrow from friends, but it was useless. The evidence was irrefutable. The will was ironclad. In the end, Terrell was formally and completely removed as a beneficiary. His share of the $2.5 million estate, roughly $1.5 million after all was said and done, was redistributed. As the only remaining son, Kareem inherited it all. The house in North Park was his, free and clear. The construction company his father had built was his. The legacy of honor was his. He had lost a wife and a brother, but he had gained himself. 1 year later, the world looked different. The rain that had seemed to fall for months after the discovery had given way to a bright, clear buffalo spring. The sun streamed through the large bay windows of the North Park bungalow, the same windows he and Sharonda had once picked out together. But the house was no longer haunted by her memory. It was filled with new life. Kareem never sold his father's construction company. Instead, he kept his job at the Tonawanda machine shop, using his new financial security not to retire, but to build something meaningful. He established an apprenticeship program partnering with a local vocational school. He took on 3 young, ambitious kids from his old neighborhood, teaching them the art of mechanics, the value of working with their hands. He paid them a good wage, far more than the $15 an hour he'd started at, and offered them a path to a stable, dignified career. His modest $59,000 salary was now supplemented by the profits from the company, but he didn't change his lifestyle. The 2012 Camry was still in the driveway, running better than ever. His $89 Timex still told the time just fine. The Sunday dinners at his mother's house had resumed, but they were different now. Quieter, smaller, more authentic. Auntie Carol was still there, her mac and cheese as good as ever. His cousins came. But the empty chairs where Sharonda and Terrell used to sit were filled by his new apprentices, shy, respectful young men who looked at Kareem with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Evelyn, his mother, was healing. The deep lines of sorrow on her face had softened. She treated the apprentices like her own grandchildren, piling their plates high and asking about their families. The family table, once a stage for deceit, had been reset with honesty and purpose. One Sunday, his youngest apprentice, a 17-year-old named Marcus, handed him a folded piece of paper. "This is for you, Mr. Kareem," he said, his voice full of youthful earnestness. Kareem unfolded it. It was a drawing, done in colored pencil, on a piece of notebook paper. It depicted a stick figure with neat locks, labeled me, standing next to a much larger, smiling figure labeled Mr. Kareem. The larger figure was holding a giant wrench. In the background was a car with a heart drawn over the engine. At the bottom, in careful, blocky letters, it said, "Thank you for fixing my future." Kareem looked at the simple drawing, at the heartfelt words, and felt a warmth spread through his chest that no amount of money could ever buy. It was more valuable than any $12,000 Rolex or $1,500 suit. It was a testament to real wealth, the kind you build, not inherit, the kind that comes from service, honor, and lifting others up. He saw Sharonda one last time, about 18 months after that final dinner. He was at a grocery store on Delaware Avenue when he saw her in the checkout line. She looked diminished. The vibrant, confident woman was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and worn. Her hair was still neat, but the expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a faded sweatshirt. She saw him, and for a moment, her eyes filled with a familiar, desperate hope. She started to walk toward him, her mouth opening to speak. Kareem didn't feel anger. He didn't feel rage. He felt a profound and quiet pity. He simply gave her a small, final nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, not invitation, and then turned and walked away. He forgave her, not for her sake, but for his. He had to release the poison to truly heal. As he walked out into the sunlight, he thought about the nature of love and betrayal. Some people are drawn to bright, flashy things, to the promise of a life that glitters. They spend their years chasing a reflection, only to realize too late that they've traded substance for a shadow. True love, he now understood, isn't found in expensive gifts or grand pronouncements. It's found in the quiet, everyday acts of service. It's in the hands that build, the hands that fix, the hands that show up day after day. It's the sturdy, reliable engine that keeps everything running, long after the shiny new paint has faded. He got into his old, reliable Camry, turned the key, and drove home. The apprentice's drawing sitting on the passenger seat, a priceless treasure in a world that so often gets the price of everything and the value of nothing. True wealth isn't what you have, but what you build. It's the lives you touch, the integrity you maintain, and the peace you find when you live a life of purpose. What do you think is the most important foundation for a happy life? Let us know your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories about finding strength in the face of betrayal.